Is beginner's mind Buddhism? Why did we choose this name? Is it got a meaning to it? It kind of does. There's a concept in Buddhism that when you first awaken, you are so excited, and everything is new and fresh, and it's like coming back to ourselves when we were children and seeing and experiencing something really amazing for the first time, that wonder and that joy and that excitement that arises for it. And of course, over time, that diminishes a little bit, and we get kind of stale in things. So there's a little bit of a double entendre going on with beginner's mind Buddhism. The way that we share Buddhist ideas is very much designed for people new to Buddhism who want to learn about Buddhism. And at the same time, it's really good for people who have experienced practices to revisit some of the initial ideas and thoughts and rediscover them and find that wonder and that joy in that. So this group is for both beginners and those who are experienced. And I'm just going to read a short quote to kick this off, and we'll talk more about. This is one of the books that I'm going to be encouraging people to read. It's called Old Path, White Clouds. It's from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's his novelized biography of the historical Buddha. This book is so good. It's going to be one of the first things that I'll suggest for folks to do. So it starts off with, this is on page 121. The chapter is "The Morning Star Has Arisen," and it starts, "Looking up, Siddhartha," that's the Buddha's name, "looking up, Siddhartha saw the morning star appear on the horizon, twinkling like a huge diamond. He had seen this star so many times before while sitting beneath the tree, but this morning it was like seeing it for the first time. It was as dazzling as the jubilant smile of enlightenment. Everything appeared strangely new. How wondrous were the blue skies and the drifting white clouds. He felt as though he and all the universe had been newly created." So that's the spirit of beginner's mind that we're trying to have in this group. Sometimes we'll get there and sometimes we won't. That's just how life rolls. And we're going to talk a lot about that as we get into the prepared topics. Okay, so moving along, is Buddhism a philosophy or a religion? And I want to do this as a little bit of a preamble to the prepared topic, because I think it's kind of important as we sort of get into what are we doing here. And the central question in religions tends to be, what is the meaning of life? What happens after I die? And how can I be happy? Most religions seek to answer these fundamental existential questions, each coming to sometimes vastly different ideas and concepts that on the surface look mutually exclusive and incompatible. Certainly thousands of books have been written about these questions, and unfortunately, a large number of wars have been fought and people have died over these questions, sadly. These are questions that have vexed humans since the beginning of time, and answers can take a lifetime of deep philosophical, religious thought and contemplation, practice. In the end, words will fail, and one can only experience, feel life. As the great Bruce Lee said, don't think, feel. Which path one chooses depends on the person. So whether you want to identify as a Buddhist or a Taoist or a Catholic or Jewish, whatnot, it really depends on you. What feels right to you? What path and teacher do you have an affinity for, given your history, your culture, your family, your education? And what can you intellectually and rationally accept as an existential model? Does it make sense? It's a deeply personal question, and ideally one which everyone can respect for another without any judgment or criticism. And some suggest Buddhism is more of a philosophy than a religion. But I believe it's more accurate to categorize Buddhism as a religion because it seeks to answer the existential questions of what is the meaning of life, what happens when I die, and can I be happy? Buddhist practice, like it or not, is a devotional practice. Even Zen Roshis will say it takes faith to enter the portal of the Dharma. One comes to the intellectual end of the road, trying to intellectually explain the ultimate dimension, which is unexplainable and inconceivable and must simply be experienced. All Buddhist teachings, concepts, and practices are skillful means to guide people toward their own direct experience of life. At their core, these concepts are simply trying to get people to see beyond their fixation with a little self, your ego, beyond words and fixed interpretations or dogmas, so one can have a personal and direct experience of life. So let's recap what we did 2 weeks ago. And I spent a ton of time thinking about, do I start with this or do I start with what we're going to talk about today? Today is the Four Noble Truths, and we'll get into that in a second, considered the first teaching of the Buddha. But I thought there was actually something more fundamentally at heart in the essence within the Four Noble Truths. So I decided to start even sooner with something that's very simple, which is abandon evil. And evil in this context could be either harm or unwholesomeness. And cultivate good. And cultivate good could be either wholesome things or merit. And then to cleanse one's mind. Now, implied here, and sometimes we think of Buddhism, and I know this is really, for me, when I was first introduced to Buddhism, it was all about letting go and becoming detached and not attached to things going on in our life and sort of sitting back. And so often now in the popular lexicon, people say, I'm in my Zen place, which means that I'm super peaceful and everything is groovy and nothing bothers me. And I think that's so inaccurate as an idea of what Buddhism, because Buddhism, implied in Buddhism, and the Buddha said this over and over and over again, we have to engage with life. We have to do things. So in these words, abandon unwholesomeness means that you got to stop doing things that aren't good for you and good for other people. And cultivate brings to mind that of a gardener or a farmer. We plant the seeds, we water them, we fertilize them, we nurture them, we take care of the weeds, we cultivate these qualities. And then cleansing your mind means that we have to actively practice. So implicit within all of Buddhist thought going forward, and as the baseline foundation, we have to take action. It's not sitting facing a wall for hours. It's not detaching from life. It's not letting go of life. We don't practice meditation to escape life. We practice to learn how to engage life fully. So the Buddha taught, he awokened, he went, one night he just went through this incredible journey and became enlightened, became the Buddha. And when he woke up, his first thoughts were what I read earlier from that passage about everything just looked brand new. And he didn't know how to begin to teach because it was just such a vast experience. And he decided that he had to teach from the beginning in a pragmatic, gradual, progressive series of stages to guide everyone on their own journey of self-discovery. He tried at first to teach something very complex, and people's eyes rolled. And for those of us who have dogs, you'll know that when a dog is curious, it kind of goes, huh? And it was a little bit like how people thought, like, what? Emptiness? Huh? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so he was like, okay. He got a lot of glassy-eyed stares, and he says, I'm going to begin at the beginning. So he had been given this beautiful park by one of the wealthy landowners called Varanasi, and it's called Deer Park. And he starts with the Four Noble Truths, which is considered the first turning of the Dharma wheel. And I just happen to love deer and doves. To me, just like works as metaphor. So you get to enjoy that. um, so the Four Noble Truths. And what I want to emphasize is that as we go along, and this group is a bit progressive, meaning it builds on itself. So I hope if you like it, you stay and you come, except in July, that will build on each other, because some of these principles are going to be important to use to hold on to as we get into some deeper concepts that are going to be a little bit on the mind-blowing side. There's a famous line from the Lotus Sutra, which is their head split into 7 pieces, meaning it just blew their mind. And you just had to get away from these concepts that you grew up with building and constructing and look deeper. So the first noble truth is that there is suffering in life. We're going to talk a lot about this in the next few slides, so I'm not going to spend too much time now. There is a cause for suffering. It's not random. This stuff just doesn't happen willy-nilly without any reason. So those are the first pairing of the 2 sets, and they're a little bit on the negative side. Like there's suffering and there's a cause for suffering. Now the Buddha brings in the hopeful side, the second pairing, which is that suffering does have an end. We can end suffering, and there is a way to do it, and there's a prescription to do it, called follow the Eightfold Path. So what I want to do first is talk about the word suffering, which is in Buddhism another of, like I mentioned earlier, this idea about detachment. One of the other most fundamental misunderstandings of Buddhism, when people think, oh, life is suffering, it means like, oh, gee, life sucks. It's not what this is saying. Okay, what is suffering? We need to kind of do a little bit of etymology here and go back to the word the Buddha used from Sanskrit was dukkha. And the better translation for dukkha is dissatisfaction or unsatisfying, meaning that everything in life ultimately is dissatisfying because it's not permanent. We have that anticipation of something fun, and the dopamine hits, and we start feeling really good, and we get it, and we taste the delicious taste, and we meet the most wonderful person in our life, and we feel so ecstatic and joyful, and within moments that feeling is gone, and we're looking for the next hit. And of course, social media has really capitalized on this with all the likes and whatnot. Like, we're constantly looking for that next hit of dopamine, and it doesn't last. So life's joys and sadnesses don't last. They're dissatisfying, and that's what dukkha is. So that first noble truth is that there's dukkha. Now, where does that actually come from? Well, dukkha's literal translation is a broken axle on a cart. So it literally means something that doesn't turn properly. Every time the wheel turns, there's a bump, 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 bump. We're going along in life, bump, up, good, bad, and keep going like that. So in the immortal words of Betty Davis, buckle up, it's going to be a rough ride. Now, the opposite of dukkha is sukha, which means a smoothly turning wheel. So when you hear the first noble truth as, oh, there is suffering in life, you can smile because you can say, well, it's not really suffering. There's dissatisfaction in life. And the better word is dukkha. So when we go through this class, we're going to actually use a couple of Sanskrit words instead of the English translation, because the English translation really doesn't do the concept justice. So this is one of them as we go along in our group discussion. Let's use dukkha instead of suffering, because dukkha just means that everything is ultimately unsatisfying because it doesn't last. And it just means that things aren't rolling smoothly. Okay. Now, so there are 4 dukkhas that really cause us to have these feelings of unsatisfactoriness: birth, aging, sickness, and death. And let me just see if I want to add anything. Okay. And then there's the 8 winds And the eight winds are the forces in life that affect us either for positive, wholesome reasons or for negative, unwholesome reasons. And there are four pairings in the eight winds. So the first pairing is gain and loss. We get something we want or we lose something that we have. And both of these the gain brings us to these high heights and the loss to these low lows, but it's this turbulence, like how the wind kicks up the waves on the ocean. You know, the ocean is huge, but the winds come and it creates these waves. And the waves are good, and then the trough is bad and good and bad, and we're constantly being battered. The next pairing is recognition and insignificance. We all want to be seen and heard, and we all want to feel valued. And a horrible, horrible, horrible thing is to be unseen, to be insignificant, where people look at you and don't even see you as you walk down the street, as an example. So these produce these feelings of elation or despondence. Praise and criticism. We all love to be praised and we all fear to be criticized. And I know I am just have a huge problem with taking criticism. I'll have 10 people and 9 people will say, that was fantastic. And then there's this one person who says, well, I didn't like that at all. That was horrible. And like, I will think about just that one person who said it was horrible and discount the 9 who said, oh my goodness, that was the best thing ever. So that's how all these winds affect us as examples. And then pleasure and pain. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, the Buddha then said there's a way to stop this unsatisfactoriness, and he gave us a prescription to it, and it's the Eightfold Path. And we're going to talk a lot about the Eightfold Path as we go along, and our next session is going to be on the second noble truth. We've spent a lot of time on the first one, which was that there is suffering in life, there is dukkha in life, there is unsatisfactoriness in life. The next one is there's a cause. So what does cause this suffering or unsatisfactory or dukkha-ness? And we're going to get into that the second Saturday of August.